Hi, listeners. Welcome to the She Speaks Life podcast, a weekly encouragement where we share our God stories. I'm your host, Jayme Elizabeth, and I am so glad you are spending time with us today to listen. Hi there, friend. Welcome to this week's episode. I'm really excited to have with me Tischa de Reep. She's talking with us about how she just walked out of an extremely difficult season and how she could still see God's goodness even in her hardest days. Tischa, welcome to the show here.
Yay, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here, Jayme.
I know. Well, we've been IG friends, Instagram friends for a while, and I just knew you had a powerful story to share with us. And I just want the listeners to know that I was reading about you, and it said that you grew up, born and raised in Trinidad. So when did you come to the US? Let's hear a little backstory about you.
So, yes, I was born and raised in Trinidad in the Caribbean. And in 2004, I married a Dutchman and moved to Holland. And then in 2009, he was working for an American company. And they offered to bring him over here to work in their head office. And so he took their offer. And so we've been living just outside of Houston since 2009.
Oh,
So
neat.
I'm a born again Texan.
Yes, there you go. Well, that's an adventure, all those different places and weather, like you were saying before we hit the recording, the extreme differences in weather. So I did see that you are my favorite kind of speaker, Bible teacher, where you take scripture and you make it just come alive with applicable situations and just really make it relatable so we can digest it and put it into action. So real quickly, I want to know, is that a recent calling for you or how did that just come about?
Well, honestly, I grew up very far from the word, far from Jesus. I was raised Catholic, but I had a very skewed gospel growing up. And when I came to Christ, it was 2010. My father in law was dying of cancer, and I found myself just crying out to the Lord for him.
Mm.
And one day I was just on my knees bawling and just asking God for mercy. And then after that, I picked up the remote and I turned the TV on, and there was a pastor on, and
Mm.
he was already done with his sermon. So his message wasn't for me that day, I guess. But he was saying, if you haven't asked Jesus into your heart, ask him now.
Mm.
And so I did. And he came.
Mm.
I mean, I literally felt something leap inside my body. It was an actual visceral reaction. And my
Wow.
first thought was, Jesus is really alive.
Yeah.
Because I had gone through much of my adulthood just exploring. I was into New Age stuff, I was into Buddhism. I tried everything and I
Right.
believed in everything, but I believed in nothing, you know?
Yes. Right.
And when I discovered Jesus, everything changed. And so I signed up for a Bible study to find out, well, what is this that I believe in exactly?
Mm-hmm.
And I got voracious for the word and I started asking question after question. I started to literally piece my life together, connect in connection to the word. And
Mm.
so in Bible study, I would ask questions or bring things up when we're talking about a scripture and just relate it to life. And
Mm-hmm.
then I got asked to be a Bible study leader. And then and then I got asked to teach my own material and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. So I have notebooks and notebooks of just journals with scripture and life and scripture and life
Mm.
and a lot of prayers.
Yeah.
And so that's just kind of how it emerged. So it was basically my pursuit of God that led me into this. And so it wasn't that I was trying to be a Bible teacher. It wasn't that I was trying to be a speaker. I was just wanting to know Jesus. And I found
Yeah.
myself here.
So cool. What a neat calling. I know. And it's the stories that I think most of us remember when people are speaking. It's the story behind what, they're talking about. So I just love storytelling, and it makes it very rememberable for others. So we are going to talk about you going through a difficult season. And one of the things that you had gone through was a spinal surgery. And a few days later, you found out that your son has a mental illness. So, talk about getting these horrible back to back news. Like, I'm thinking of Job in the Bible, where he kept having that messenger coming again and again with bad news. So take us back to that time where you first found out that you had to have this spinal injury, just this random thing that was unexpected, and
Mhm.
then having the other set of news about your son.
Yeah, so I actually have a weird spinal condition where my spine is aging rapidly. And
Mm.
so when I was 27, they said my spine was 85 years old.
Oh, wow.
And so in 2017, it happened slowly over time, and I had been seeing a neurosurgeon for a long time, where it got to the point where I needed surgery to fuse three of my vertebrae, remove a couple discs. And so I did that back in 2017. And he said, well, there is the possibility that there'll be more vertebrae in your neck that will probably need the same surgery later on.
Mm-hmm.
And everything was fine. I'd been doing fine after that surgery. And then on Halloween last year, I was walking around the neighborhood with my husband, and I was telling him, something doesn't feel right. I think I need to go find another neurosurgeon, because our insurance changed. So I needed a new surgeon. And so I wasn't even seeing anybody because I had been fine for years.
Yeah.
And 2 days after that, I was driving my son to class, and this horrific, debilitating pain took over me to where I could barely drive. I had to call my husband to come home.
Mm-hmm.
And from then on, I was bedridden
Mm.
for pretty much the whole month. I could move, but it was just excruciating to move.
Oh.
I was on painkillers, muscle relaxants, steroids, everything to just kind of try to keep it under control. But I could not move, I could not function, and I was rapidly losing the use of my left arm as well, as my nerves were being impinged more and more. And so in November 30th, I had to have surgery to remove another disc and fuse two more vertebrae. And so that happened. And it was funny because the first time it was coming on slowly, so we knew that we'd get to that point. This time it was all just so quickly that I couldn't even wrap my mind around it properly, make
Mm-hmm.
plans, do anything. But all
Right.
that time while I was lying in bed, God was downloading things into me. When
Mm-hmm.
I would read scripture, He would tell me what He wanted me to share from it. It was just
Mm-hmm.
such a beautiful time. Even though I was in constant pain, I had such beautiful conversations with God. And then 3 days after my surgery, my son was diagnosed with um, a series of mental illnesses, actually, and some of them quite serious. And so I was heavily medicated, so I couldn't even wrap my mind around it. So it took
Right.
weeks, and it was like this build up of what happened and what was happening to hit
Mhm.
me over and over. And I
Mhm.
ended up going through this severe grief for my
Mhm.
son,
Mhm.
because it was suddenly like I came out of the fog and it was like, what? What's happening? What's happening?
Right.
And that's been really just a season. But you mentioned Job, and Job
Mhm.
2:10 says, shall we accept good from God and not trouble? And that's the funny thing. We think that I'm a believer now, I have Jesus, so my testimony is written, and that my testimony ends when I say yes to Jesus. But he continues to write our testimony, and he continues to walk with us through these challenges. The challenges still come. It's just, where are we going to look?
Right.
Are we going to look to him, or are we going to look to something else? Are we going to pick up the phone and complain about it to our friends, or are we going to turn to some other source of empty comfort, or are we
Yeah.
going to turn to God in it?
So good. I know it's all about our response, right? How are we going to
Right.
respond to these things? And after you talking about being bedridden, it's reminded me of the time that we were praying about moving from Southern California to Austin. And we had run into a horrible financial hardship. We had the economy collapse back in 2007, 2008 time.
Yes.
And wow, we were just wiped out, didn't know what we were doing. I had 3 young kids at the time, and we went to Texas for the first time to visit. And my husband had a friend there. Well, I came down with horrible bronchial cough. Like my lungs just felt so heavy, like an elephant was
Mm.
sitting on it, right? And I knew that was probably bronchitis, but then by the time I got home, the doctor was like, you've got full blown pneumonia. You need to be on bed rest. And I think all of us moms can think how awful that would be if you had 3 littles at the time and you're telling the mom you have to be on bed rest. It's like, that's going to be a little impossible. So, and you got to have the whole it takes a village to come together and take care of all your everyday needs with the kids and the house and everything else. So I managed to be on a 3-week bed rest, but it was the most beautiful time. Like you were saying, even though I was ill, you have a choice where to
Right.
just sit there and zone out and watch TV, or are
Mm-hmm.
you going to dive in and get closer to God?
Right.
And so after you were saying that, I can reflect now on what I was doing with going into scripture, because I was really wrestling with God whether or not we were to move, because I mean, Southern California, I'm a beach girl. That's all I've known. And all my family is there. So I'm like, what, Lord? Like, and I felt a little this tug to move to Austin. And so it was just plenty of prayer and just
Mm-hmm.
seeking him to make sure that this was the move that he wanted us to do. And I remember my sister-in-law giving me a book called Jesus of the Suburbia, I think it's called. And it's talking about how are you going to be this cul-de-sac Christian, like just a suburban
Right.
Christian, or are you going to get out there and really obey and do those scary things that God is speaking into you to go do? And so it just changed my life. It wrecked my life, this book. And I was like, got out of this like 3-week, coma almost. And I told my husband, I'm like, I think the Lord is telling us to move to Austin. So that's how we got the ball rolling. But it wasn't until it's literally, it was like, be still and know that I'm God, that I had to like shut all distractions and everything out and just be in bed to seek him. And I see how he did that intentional
Right.
and and it was on purpose so that he can speak to me, so I can hear him speak. Yeah.
It's like when we have little kids and sometimes we have to just hold them by their shoulders
Yes.
and hold them still so that we can get our message across to them.
Right.
And God allows for us to go through these seasons of stillness so that we can come into communion with him, and we can resist it and complain and feel sorry for ourselves and wallow, or
Mhm.
we could just surrender and submit and say, okay, God, how are you going to be glorified in this? Or even
Right.
to say, I'm hurting, Lord, and I can't see my way out of this, and just to explain that. I mean, because when you look through, Joseph was imprisoned, and Jeremiah was in the cistern, and Elijah was in the cave, and
Yeah.
there's so many times throughout scripture that God's people were stuck.
Right.
And sometimes it feels like we're stuck, but he is moving on our behalf. He is setting
Mhm.
things up. He's making those plans. I mean, when it came to my son, I've been involved in ministry for many years now. And my testimony, I have been through sexual abuse, rape, divorce, abortion, binge drinking, alcohol abuse. I've
Mhm.
gone through everything, homelessness even. And so there are so many things that I can speak into when I
Mhm.
come across women. I have done ministry in Africa with the poorest of the poorest women who are coming to church with no shoes on their feet. I have done ministry down in Houston with homeless women with AIDS. I have done ministry with rich suburban housewives who have just pain in their marriages and pain with their kids. And the one
Mhm.
thing that I couldn't speak into was mental illness. That was the one thing that I had never experienced, I'd never known close up, and I just couldn't relate to. And I found myself praying, God, please show me what to say to these women. Please show me how to help them, because
Mhm.
it's the one thing that I can't connect to. And now, boom, overnight, I became a mental health mom.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so, yes, it's hard. And yes, I'm praying for my son's healing every day. But at the same time, I'm thanking God because he has a bigger plan. And it's not about us and what we're going through. And so, if he requires us to be still, just
Mhm.
surrender to that, just submit to that. And just
Mhm.
be still. And because, yes, there's that verse, be still and know that I am God. But that's only half the verse. The verse goes on
Right.
to say, I will be
Yeah,
exalted in the nations. I will
that's
be
right.
exalted over all the earth. And so it's about him. He will be
Mhm.
exalted no matter what. So we could fight it and he'll still be exalted, or we can surrender and submit to his plan because
Yeah.
he'll be exalted.
Yeah.
So
I know, and it's just amazing, through the suffering and through that pain, there's something so beautiful that comes out of that, and it's
yes.
all for helping others, because that's what Jesus was all about,
Yes.
serving others. And by what you have gone through, then you're able to serve the women or serve men,
Right.
where you're telling them, this is what I went through and this is how I got through, and
Right.
you're not alone. And how much more, that you could help somebody if you've gone through that same thing that they have. So, so encouraging. So, I know you're all about relatable, little bite-sized things that we can like digest. So, what are some things, like if you're going through, you've had experience with grief, talking about that history
Mhm.
that you've gone through, homelessness and abortion and all that, that had to have been so painful to heal from. can you just give us some life applications of, if you're in a season of grief, whether it's something you've done on your own or just out of your control, something happened in your life. What are some things that we can take action in if we are in the middle of something painful?
Well, we have, particularly in this culture, we have this tendency to want to avoid pain.
Hmm.
And we don't want to press into that pain and ride through it. And
Hmm.
sometimes we need to hunker down and cling. The thing is that there couldn't have been a resurrection without a crucifixion.
Hmm.
If Jesus did not go through that torture and torment of the crucifixion, if he hadn't died, he couldn't have been raised. And it's the same for us. We can't live a resurrected life if we don't go through the suffering, if we
Hmm.
don't die to self, if we don't have those things to grieve. With my son, I called a friend to talk to her about it. I was kind of in this really bad wallowing stage, eating badly, feeling sorry for myself, and telling
Right.
anybody who would listen about how my heart was breaking for my son. And I
Sure.
called a friend and I told her about it. And she said, day after tomorrow, there's a mental health conference at my church. And if I hadn't called her right then, I wouldn't have known about the conference. My son and I went together, and there was so much hope in that conference. And I am seeing ministry leaders stand up on that stage and speak who, at my son's age, my son's a teenager, they were in rehab. These people were at the depths of pain from mental illness and addiction. And
Mhm.
they're now helping people and changing lives. And so I suddenly just had so much hope, and I trusted in what God would do. And I saw as well, if when we remember the things that we've gone through, and we
Mhm.
know, oh, God carried me out of that, he'll carry me out of this. It's the same reason
Right.
why Israel so many times tells the Exodus story over and over and over again. All
Right.
throughout scripture, even into the New Testament, you'll see them tell that whole story again of the
Mhm.
Exodus. And it's because they need to remember what God has done, and we need to remember what God has done in our lives to
Mhm.
know that he will do it again. All those things that you talked about that I went through, the homelessness and rape and divorce and all those things, to
Mhm.
to see how God has taken me out of everything. It's just like Genesis 50:20, what man meant for evil, God will use for good. And he has. And so I know that with this, he will use it too. So now I'm hopeful. I'm
Mhm.
excited to see what he's going to do, how he's going to use it, who he's going to help through this, through my son's story, through my story as his mom. And um and so I am living resurrected in that, so I'm no longer
Mhm.
grieving. I have that resurrection. I have my son back, because
Yeah.
he's not lost in my mind
Right.
anymore. And so that's what we need to remember.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so good. I know I'm a journaler, so I like to journal and remember, write it down, remember the things that God has done.
Yes.
And, I believe in the Bible that when they stopped talking about the remembrance of the Lord, that's when they
Hmm.
became astray.
Oh,
And
yes.
yeah. So, it's so easy for us to do that as well if we tend to forget. And it's
Right.
usually when we're looking so self-focused inwardly.
Right.
And
Yes. And
if we,
not up to him.
right, up to him, focus on him, look outward, who could we help? Like, what is the Lord teaching me through this
Right.
instead of going, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going through this, which hello,
Yes.
we all do that. And we usually
Yes.
go to that place first and then we're like, okay, God, what are you trying to teach me? But yeah, so cool.
Yeah. I
Well,
mean,
yeah,
no, I was just gonna say really quickly, like
yeah,
even in the Bible, there are women who couldn't have kids, and then God granted them a child. And it was
yes.
never that, okay, you're granted a child so that you can have your child because you've always wanted a child. Their children were going to be, it was Isaac, it was Samson,
Mhm.
it was John the Baptist, it was Samuel the prophet. They were people who were going to be servants of God and going
Right.
to do things for his people. And so, yes, even when he does give us what we need, it's not necessarily for us. It's
Mhm.
it's it's for his kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah, so good. And it takes a while to grasp that. I think
Yes.
it takes
It does. It
some
does. It takes
valleys.
surrender.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
does.
For sure, for sure.
But trust him.
Yes, and I think trusting that's goes along with that surrender, right? Because you can't really
Yes.
trust unless you let go, and so that's
Right.
a hard thing to do, but when we do, we get through and can see and overcome and see that
Mhm.
other side. So, well, so good and encouraging. So, I know that you are the founder of the Well Communicators, and
Yes.
um, you just want to talk briefly on that, and then we'll finish up with a
Sure.
little takeaway.
So the Well Communicators, we're a collective, a diverse collective of Christian communicators, all women from all over the US, and we talk on a variety of subjects. We're podcasters, we're authors, speakers, teachers, worship leaders. And so we have a website, thewellcommunicators.com, and so we are available to be booked for any event that you might have, any kind of teaching that you might have. We also have a number of online resources available in terms of coaching sessions, um, kind of academy courses, Bible studies, all sorts of things. So yeah, check us out because it's 29 women from all over the US, all different walks of life. And so I really am excited about what we're going to do this year. I had to take a few months off, needless to say, with everything going on, but I'm really excited to start planning some things for us to do together.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. It's like a one-stop shop. If you're
Yes.
just a woman's ministry leader or director and you're just looking to find somebody to speak on a certain subject, you make it really easy just to type it
Yeah,
in and look for that person for your area. So really
absolutely.
cool. So if you could just finish us off with just speaking life of a takeaway that the listeners can just kind of marinate on once they're done hearing this message.
Yeah, I'll just go back to Job 2:10. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? Just remember he's still writing your testimony.
Mhm.
And so if you could just hold on to him and keep your eyes on him through the hard times, through the wilderness period, then he will see you through, and it'll be really excited when you're on the other side looking back what you've overcome with him.
Yeah, I know. It's hard in the meantime, but if we can see his goodness, put on those
Yes.
spiritual lens and
Yes.
see what he sees, that always helps us. And in order to do that, we got to dive into his word and be in prayer, dialogue with him.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so cool. Well, thank you, Tisha, for coming on here and sharing your story with us. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It was so much fun. It really was.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening today. I trust that God has encouraged you through this message. For more information on this ministry and to access free downloads, please visit my website at jaymeelizabeth.com and sign up. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Jayme Elizabeth She Speaks Life. That's Jayme Elizabeth She Speaks Life. Until next time, my friends, I pray God reveals Himself through your own life story.